Are you trying to make a decision but you keep getting stuck? Watch today's video for 6 common barriers to making decisions. Hey everyone, my name is Diana Garcia. I'm a licensed therapist in Florida, owner of a private practice called Nurturing Minds Counseling. Let's jump into this week's video. If you want to take this video to the next level, download my decision-making guide to help you really understand how these barriers are keeping you stuck and some tips to help you actually move through them or apply some of the tips I'm going to go through today. The first barrier, analysis paralysis. Pretty much you're starting to overthink this decision and not taking action, which in itself is still kind of you deciding not to take an action is still a decision in and of itself. Okay, when I say analysis paralysis, what I really mean is that I always talk about the difference between helpful planning and then at some point that shifts over, could to worrying or just overthinking. So when I say helpful planning, I mean it's helpful to a certain degree when you're making a decision to gather information. Maybe there's something that you don't know, especially if it's a decision that's outside of your expertise. So great, you might be trying to think about, plan through, strategize. That's all great and dandy. But when it comes to a certain point where there might either be a point where you just know as much as you're going to know, or you're going to have to accept that there's just something you don't know, but you keep thinking about it and you keep trying to go over it and explore your options and think of other additional ways to problem solve, like these worst case scenarios, then usually that's an indication that now you're just doing analysis paralysis, you're just worrying and you're just overthinking. So if that resonates with you, it's helpful to know that, because if you recognize that that's the stage that you're in, then you're going to have to rein it back in and recognize that something else is keeping you stuck. Because at this point, you have as much information as you're going to have in order to make this decision. The second barrier is there could be some perfectionism going on. So if you're not sure about perfectionism, check out this video where I do some common traits of perfectionism. But generally when I talk about this, it's this sense of really having these high standards, this sense of wanting, when I relate it back to this decision, potentially wanting to make the perfect decision, which what is even the perfect decision? Does that even exist? I'm sure your mind might tell you it does exist. But when I say perfectionism, ultimately, whatever this perfect decision your mind is telling you, you keep trying to go over it and over it. So it's related to the first one, analysis paralysis, but ultimately it's this fear of making a mistake, right? So a little bit with that perfectionism is you're trying to be flawless. You don't want to make any mistakes. And so the fear of making mistakes is keeping you really stuck. I usually encourage clients, if that's what's going on, we do some of the work around making mistakes, like acknowledging that making mistakes, it's normal. We all make mistakes. Mistakes are allowed. And if anything, mistakes can be a great learning opportunity. I know when I say that, some of my clients are like, yeah, I don't need that learning opportunity. I just rather not make a mistake. I get it. Listen, if I could, I'd love to make decisions in my life that always turn out exactly the way I want, this perfect decision, right? Even the word perfect, there's a little bit of a fallacy there. But again, it's really being able to be comfortable with making the mistake and really acknowledging what are the thoughts and the feelings that show up when you think about making a mistake. It's also helpful to think about other instances in your life where maybe you made a mistake and it was okay. Now, there could also be instances in your life where you made a mistake and there was these dire consequences, and maybe that's also what's contributing. Maybe you need to work through those past mistakes to really start to lean into more confidence that you can make decisions and be okay. All right, the third barrier is unable to cope with the feelings that are showing up when you're thinking about making this decision. So a lot of times when we're thinking about making a decision and we keep thinking about it and analysis paralysis and we're worrying about it, it's helpful to really start to understand what are the feelings that start to show up when you think about this decision and all the potential outcomes, right? So when you think about one outcome, what do you feel? When you think about another one, what are you feeling? Or even as you're thinking about making a decision, right? This upcoming decision, what is the feeling that's showing up and where does that show up in your body? Sometimes when we can't cope with the emotions, or when our emotions are kind of getting in our way or clouding maybe us making a decision that's based on our values versus just being impulsive or being angry, or at a certain point we're just so over this decision that we just want to get it over with, right? So it's helpful to understand like the role that your emotions are playing when trying to make this decision. So I'd encourage you to identify what are those emotions that are getting in your way, and are they trying to signify, send you messages, or at this point, again, are they just keeping you really stuck? fourth barrier, it's really that there's just too much outside noise. Listen, I'm totally guilty at times when I have a decision. I'll ask different people in my life, people that I trust, about their opinions, which can be helpful sometimes, but I also realize sometimes it just might keep me really stuck because I can't kind of drown out the outside noise to know what's ultimately what I want, what feels right for me, or at least the best for me in that moment. And so if that's something you're struggling with, I would really encourage you to think about that, especially if you have any people-pleasing tendencies. Check out this video to know more about that. But either way, if you are prone to want to get other people's opinion, that you don't want to disappoint other people, and maybe you start to lose a sense of what you want and other people's feedback, then that can be really confusing and distracting. And so it might be really taking a period where you don't ask anybody else. Like if you already have, great, just kind of note that, shelf that, but really try to kind of drown out that outside noise and sit with yourself, have some moments of quiet reflection to try to think about what it is about this decision, what you ultimately want, right? This is really helpful to think about some of your values, right? So what are the values that are really important to you when you think about an outcome that feels ideal? What are the ways that you want to show up? What are the qualities that you would embody? And same thing, even if it's an outcome that isn't what you want to happen, if that were to happen, what are the values that you want to embody, right? Because values really can be a good way to help us to know when we're facing a decision what's important to us. All right, the next barrier is maybe you're struggling with a little bit decision fatigue. So on average, I read a study that said humans can make about 35,000 decisions in a day. Again, they can be minute decisions like what are you having for breakfast, what color shoes are you wearing, and whatnot. But either way, that we're making so many decisions throughout the day, which on one end, when we make so many decisions, we can then fall prey to decision fatigue, where at some point we're just like overwhelmed, we're tired, we've made too many decisions, so we don't have the internal resources to dedicate to this new decision. But this decision still has to be made. So if that's the case, I'd encourage you to think about maybe this is an important decision, but you're trying to make this decision after you've had a really stressful day. And now like you have to think about like allocate your internal resources, like thinking about it, managing the feelings, maybe having conversations with partners or family members, whatever the case is, but you just don't have the internal resources to do it. So maybe then you procrastinate, or maybe you get stuck again, analysis paralysis, or maybe you're just trying to make an impulsive decision or just get stuck in indecision. So if you do notice that, it's also helpful. This can be an indication, like maybe clear out a day or a chunk of your day, depending on how important this decision is, to really kind of, again, give yourself some space to like make this decision top of mind, right? Again, if it's also something that isn't as important, and that's the other thing when I'm thinking about these decisions, smaller decisions that aren't that important, it's helpful to start to get better at just making them routine or just being more comfortable with the cost. Sometimes we can get stuck on a decision that when we really slow down, the outcome or the cost isn't that big, and yet we're spinning our wheels for no reason. Clearly, this is a decision that's much more important. Then you should take your time to think about it, explore it. But again, maybe then this is a decision that you have to really schedule in to start to work through and process. All right, the last barrier is maybe you're just risk averse. So what I mean by that is you just don't like taking risk, like that sense of uncertainty, that tolerating that uncertainty and the potential risks that come with making a decision might be really highly uncomfortable for you. And trust me, I get it. When I was making the decision to go full-time in my private practice, to go from a stable, paycheck, and then deciding like I'm going to go all in on this business, that was a really hard decision for me. Like there was a part of me that was averse to the outcome. I need a paycheck to pay my bills, like most of us. And so again, if that's something like if there's a certain risk involved with the decision, which a lot of decisions there are, hence why some of us can get really stuck, it's helpful to acknowledge if maybe you tend to lean on the risk averse side. And that's okay, right? Sometimes that can actually be really helpful for you. Maybe being averse to risk means that at times you've been really careful and you've planned things out, or maybe you've prevented some consequences in your life from happening because of it. But if this is a decision that you have to make, or it's something that it keeps coming up or nagging at you, or maybe it's a value-based decision or something that ultimately the payoff would really be worth it to you, then you have to start to get comfortable with the fact that you're going to be uncomfortable with the risk. And that's like not ideal. In a perfect world, we could plan everything out to make sure that we know what the outcome is going to be, but inherently there is going to be a level of uncertainty. And to take this video to the next level, download my decision-making guide, look at the notes below to see how, so you can really start to move through some of these barriers. Check out the notes below to see how you can do that. And as always, I encourage you to continue nurturing your mind, body, and soul. Don't let those decisions get in the way, and I hope you guys have a great one.